Picture an apple in your mind's eye. What comes up? Is it red? Is it juicy? Is it green like those Granny Smith apples? Is it sliced up? Does it have a stem? Our guest today cannot picture such an apple at all. In fact, he can't picture anything in his mind's eye, and yet he is one of the most brilliant, successful sales engineers that I personally know. Welcome to the third episode of the Neurodivergent Product Manager podcast. I'm your host, Sid Nanda, and in this episode, I'm joined by Senior Solutions Engineer Mike McKinley. At the time of this recording, Mike was still at Rapid7, and he has since moved to HackerOne, where I'm sure he's killing it in his SE role there. Mike has a form of neurodivergence called aphantasia, and he literally cannot create images with his mind. And despite this, he is one of the most professional, brilliant SEs out there. He has had a long career as a veteran, as a professional musician, and in this podcast, he exchanges advice on how to embrace your differences and how being authentic, especially in sales or customer-facing profession, can be really meaningful. This is one of the most enjoyable conversations out there, and to this day, I keep coming back to it just because of the general life advice he shares. And as always, if you have any form of neurodivergence or know anyone that does, whether that's autism, bipolar, ADHD, or aphantasia, if you know someone that works in tech that you think could benefit by hearing some of the lessons in this video, consider sharing, consider liking, consider subscribing to this channel. It's a free action that you can take to help out this community. So with that, I hope you enjoy this podcast with Mike McKinley. Awesome, Mike McKinley, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on. This is one I was really looking forward to for a really long time. You are the third guest on this show, and I had you in mind almost as I was conceiving of this whole thing, this neurodivergent podcast. Mike, would you mind giving our audience maybe a little bit of introduction? Your role at Rapid7. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my name is Michael McKinley. I'm a security professional, just like you are, Sid. And the role that I have at Rapid7 is really, I jokingly for a long time said that I translate from bro to nerd and then back. And that's basically what my job is to take, what the bros are trying to say, translate it to the nerds who are making the decisions, and then kind of translate that back so the bros understand how they can help support those nerds in making the decision. But I'm a solutions engineer is the actual official title. And, now specifically I work with all different types of partners for the business, because when you're solving very complex problems, you can't do it alone. And I think that, vendors have finally picked up on that to a point where it's, important for us to get out there to establish partnerships, to invest in those partnerships, because that's what's going to make the customer successful. And that's really what's going to continue to, drive our successes when we're helping people solve real problems. So I've been here for 5 years. Prior to being here, I was at a couple of other security vendors. And actually, prior to that, I played music professionally for 10 years. So it's kind of an interesting career path, not very logical, I think, when most people hear about it. But at the end of the day, it's just all numbers and patterns. So
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, when Jordan, who was our first guest, was on the show, we had a conversation around, I think to really be a good product manager, you need to have a great SE in your corner. And you were one of the first people that came to mind when I was thinking about that. And yeah, I guess would you mind sharing with our audience a bit about your particular form of neurodivergence? This is the Neurodivergent Product Manager podcast, and how it has shaped your career path, and also how it's really developed you that great product sense that you have, and that knowledge, understanding of the customer's pain points. I'd love to hear how neurodivergence ties into that.
So I've always known from like the get-go there was something that was a little bit different about the way I thought, but I could never pinpoint exactly what it was. And, even from an early age, it just seemed like, people would describe the way they thought about things, describe the way that they, would learn things. And I couldn't connect the dots. But, I think a part of the reason for that is because this was just discovered, like this was just given a name in 2017,
Mm.
so it's not a scenario where, I went through my whole life with this condition and then realized, oh, now I have it. And there's a whole body of literature on it. There's a ton of us out there that know we have it. But the particular variety I have is referred to as aphantasia. And so listeners might have seen the meme that came up, I think, on TikTok a while back, and that's where it was kind of famously seen. And what it was just this picture of an apple and the varying degrees of an apple you would visualize. Well, I'm on an extreme end of this where I have no sensory imagination and no sensory kind of memories. So, if you're trying to imagine what that means, if you've never heard of that before, when somebody says a word to you and asks you to visualize it in your head, imagine closing your eyes and just seeing blank. You don't see anything. You don't hear anything. Obviously, I'm talking, I referenced things from my history, so I figured out a way to store those memories. But I think part of the way I've started to think that part of the reason that technology was just such a natural and appealing career path to me, in the kind of roundabout way I took to get here, was because I really relate to machines. They store everything in a one or a zero, at the base. So in essence, they had to figure out, or we had to figure out with the machines we built, how to store these complex abstract ideas that are represented in different mediums in a very particular way. And we had to figure out how to store those in a way that we could find them, that they were in some sort of order, and that they, to really drive value then to be able to take those abstract, you know, either data types or forms or whatever they were, and combine those together with others and process them and create new things. So, on the one hand, if I'm trying to troubleshoot something, I'm not, I'm thinking through different points of connection,
Mm-hmm.
and that's, I have to say that becoming like kind of more self-aware about the way that my mind works, the way it doesn't work, it's really just developed a deep sense of gratitude that I have for my ability to make connections between ideas
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, I don't know if I didn't have that ability to make all of those connections between these abstract ideas in my head, I don't think that I would have been able to be as successful. And I think I might have struggled quite a bit more to figure out my place in the world, and to find a way that I could add value. Because if I can't replay something in my head, if I can't replay a scenario by thinking of the pictures, the sounds, the smells, because
Mm-hmm.
none of that occurs after the fact, then how am I supposed to retain it? What do I do? And for me, it really is expressed itself in a way where, if I sat here and thought about, my mom's face, I could describe that to you, but there's no pictures, right? And so I connect the fact that, she's got the same round nose that I do, and that she's got the same small ears that I do. And I connect the fact that, we've got a similar look, but I don't think that I'd be very successful. First off, I'm not great at drawing, which I mean might make sense if I don't see pictures in my head. There's no way to express that. But I don't think that I could recreate that, one for one, because the way that I'm thinking about that and storing that really just has to do with these facts.
Mm-hmm.
So I've started to think about my brain like a graph database. Basically, I'll have a type that's a kind of a concrete data type, and then there will be these different properties that expand off that type, and everything's about relationships from there. It's really not, it's not a book, it's not a catalog, it's not even necessarily a story. It really just comes down to, all right, how do I connect this dot to a previous dot?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some ways, not having the sensory imagination that you get in the world, it's helped me to optimize for that, because if I'm not seeing two conflicting pictures, then it might be easier for me to see the common thread between two abstract thoughts than it would be if I was trying to overlay those pictures and put them together.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I wonder, like, because one of the things I really appreciate working with you is you really are a solutions engineer in the truest sense of the word, and that you come up with these really creative kind of solutions and services for folks that are interested in, or have that sort of need, right? And I wonder to what degree maybe what you said, the sort of graph database that you have, where these concepts are by necessity like linked together in this way,
Mhm.
if that like fosters that creative thinking a lot easier, and I wonder, talk about that.
Yeah. So years ago, I was in a group of folks and we did this exercise called Strength Finder, right? And it was based off this idea of strength psychology, which there's some merits to it. There's definitely some merits to playing into your strengths, figuring out what those are, and optimizing to just do that as much as possible. One of the strengths that was listed was ideation. And I had a colleague who had an advanced degree in mental health, and she giggled because she's, said She's like, I've never heard that used in a positive context because
Uh-huh.
most of the time, if she heard ideation, it was in relation to delusion. It was making connections that don't exist,
Hmm.
right? What the strength finder was pointing out is it's really easy for my brain to make connections. And looking back on that through the lens of understanding that, my brain is operating a bit more like a graph database. I mean, I think that's part of like what helps that creative process for me is I think it takes a little bit of the limitation off the creativity,
Hmm.
So it's a lot easier for me to see connections between things because I'm not seeing it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm just looking for commonality and I'm not stuck on a picture or a
Hmm.
sound. You know, I remember asking a music professor when I was in school one time if two things were the same. And I remember it puzzled him. He's like, well, no, well, yeah, yeah, I guess they are, but nobody thinks that way, is exactly what he said, you
Uh,
know? Um, and I didn't take it as a dig because like what it sounded like he was telling me was like nobody's really presented that idea to me before,
right, right. Yeah.
So, but I think that's a big part of it. And a lot of what comes down to creating services or finding solutions comes down to is looking for pain and understanding the pain behind what's being done now or what we need to do in the future, and then zeroing in on them, you know? And for me, because it's all connection based, there's not a scenario where the world's a nail. So there's not a scenario where I'm looking at a problem set and I'm stuck thinking on technology
Hmm.
because the people are always connected to it. And so is the process. So if I'm thinking about a creative solution and that solution has, something to do with solving a problem set, I want to be able to address the pain points that exist throughout the problem set, but also look for like a core source, of that pain. And having those connections just it really, really helps with that. I think that I think the way that sometimes it comes out is if there's some sort of superpower associated with that way of thinking, it's being able to zoom out really quickly and see the entire forest,
Yeah.
you know, but still being able to zoom in on the details. And details are an area, admittedly, where oftentimes I'll need help, but I can typically get down to that technical detail level pretty quickly. I just not necessarily where I start, and I'll typically zoom back out to try to understand in the broader context what each component means. And I think part of what, has helped me be really good at this is looking for consistency across all those connections when it comes to providing advice around a service or some sort of solution so that it is speaking more holistically to the problem and to the different types of pain that's being experienced as opposed to just trying to solve one part of it and then not understanding why that single solution didn't solve the whole problem.
I
Like
think that's
that's
such a, yeah. Go ahead.
oh yeah, that was it.
No, Mike, I think that's it's such a critical thing you highlighted, which is like even as someone who's, whose job literally is to solve customers' problems, you're still focused on the problem space, right? So like you're still focused on understanding the root cause of the problem and gathering
Mhm,
information that helps you identify which is the right problem to solve for. And I think like
mhm,
that is something that I think it took me a few years in product management to really realize, which is like focus on the problem space itself, and then
mhm.
you know do what you can to understand that before you actually go out trying to craft the right solution. And I love also what you mentioned around trying to find like the root cause for that problem. And it reminds me of like this whole like the five whys framework, right? Where you keep asking yourself like, hey, why is this a problem, right? And then why is that the problem, right? Why is that the problem? And then until you find something that you can't really double click on anymore, and
Yeah,
then that's like a good indication that maybe that is the right problem to solve for.
yeah.
I'm wondering, what's your experience, Mike, maybe even like I know you've spoken, we have a few PMs on our side. What is your experience like collaborating with product managers? Because really, I think there is a sort of like Historically, I mean, most folks, when they think of product management, they think of, hey, a product guy, a UX guy, and an engineering guy. Those sort of the guy or gal, and those are kind of like the holy trinity, so to speak. But
Hmm.
the more that I see it, and in my experience, the best product managers, they interact regularly with SEs in particular, because
Hmm.
in my opinion, SEs have almost a better understanding of the problem space than a customer may do of their own problems. And I wonder if you could just describe the nature of that collaboration a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's if we stick with the pain analogy, if you think about a team of doctors who are all specialists in one area, then they're all going to have a slightly nuanced way to approach the pain that a patient might be experiencing.
Hmm.
I think that the reason that the SEPM relationship is so valuable is because the SEs oftentimes will just have amplified customer pain. And I think a lot of what typically makes an SE is somebody who's got a baseline level of empathy and hard skill and soft skills, along with a set of hard skills where they hear the pain that somebody's experiencing, and then that's loud enough to them that they want to help fix that. So having that amplified exposure to pain, but also having just a larger and wider exposure to it, I think helps provide a context because, I mean, just as a stupid example, it's like, hey, the customers don't like this report. Oh, okay, well, we need to fix the report. Why? What
Hmm.
don't they like about the report? And then what's the outcome they're struggling with from the report? Because the reason I don't like the report is because it's not a dashboard, not because they need the report fixed. So there's oftentimes, I think there are elements of pain or just elements of frustration that people experience. And I think the combo of just having that amplified to somebody who's hearing it on a regular basis and really working to solve it. And then most of us, on this side, we have experience. The empathy comes from the experience we have doing the same job that person we're trying to help. So most of us haven't been PMs before, but most of us have worked in some way, shape, or form as a practitioner, and we know exactly the pressure and exactly the pain you're feeling. So it's a very real, visceral thing for us. Now, I'm sitting here describing this to you, and I realize that I'm describing strengths in this role that I don't have. I have empathy, but I can't relive any of that pain. I don't have flashbacks of memories of just like thinking about you know being up at night because the sim deployment's not going well or things like that. So it's like there's elements of this where I think I've had to adapt, and I think I've had to compensate, and in certain cases maybe overcompensate, just based off of what things are natural and easy, and then what things I find frankly just really difficult. You know,
Hmm.
so I think that's like eh, there's elements to this that I feel like I'm stronger in than other SCs are, but I think just that overall relationship, it's important to have somebody who's in touch with that pain to provide that detailed feedback. And the SE role typically scales for that really well because you're not too far removed from remembering what that feels like. And you are hearing it and working with it on a very regular basis and can provide that pointed feedback. And after you've done it a few times, you also start to get a sense of what works, in ways you didn't have when prior to just all that exposure to it. And that's in large part thanks, I think, to the relationship with the PM, because the expertise that y'all tended to bring is just being able to take the pain that we're describing and some of the solution ideas that we might have around it and actualize that into a plan, and just typically pretty quickly be like, yeah, we could do that, or I don't, there's no way to do that. So the longer that relationship continues, I think it just continues to strengthen itself because both parties become more aware and just continue to add tools to the toolbox. And I think that's a big part of where the strongest PMs that I've worked with, they're not career PMs. They typically had two or three roles before they got to the PM role, and that varied experience they bring just brings such a diverse toolkit that they've got a lot of different options in their bag when it comes to actually how to go about solving a problem.
That's such a good point, Mike. And As I think about in my career, not just at Rapid 7, but elsewhere as well, the oftentimes like the PMs that I looked up to the most, they usually spent like a couple of years in an SE type role, or they hopped in from an SE type role. And it really showed because it showed in a few different ways. The first is when, they're on discovery calls talking with the customer. You
Mhm.
to your point, you have this extra layer of empathy if you were a previous um, as an SE, you really are a user of the tools in many ways. You have
Yeah.
to learn the ins and outs, and you've showed me how to demo these tools before. So you really are a power user. So to your point, you have that extra layer of empathy, but also I think you also just tend to have a strong understanding of where the market in general is headed with this sort of thing because provided you've worked in the same domain. I mean, Mike, obviously you're cyber professional. Folks listening to this, maybe they don't have a cyber background, but it does apply, right? Like that domain expertise kind of gives you a sixth sense
100%.
as to where the market is headed. So
Mhm.
oftentimes, at least like for me, I love showing some of the more forward-facing stuff that we're working from a strategy or vision perspective to you or another one of our SCs
Mhm.
because I feel like you have a good sense of those market trends and can very be that first sense of like, hey, is this even the right direction or not? Is there validity to this or not? And hopefully you've done the proper research with the customer first, but I think
Right.
getting your perspective as a domain expert as well as an expert of the product is super valuable.
I think the power user thing is, I think that plays a big role in it. And I think it's that balance of, just understanding the tool intimately enough that you can hear the pain from the customer and pinpoint where it's coming,
Hmm.
or whoever's providing kind of the, that message back of this is the part that sucks, because having that intimacy with the actual process with the tool itself. And then honestly, the more that you get to know the people who are providing that feedback to you, I mean, I'm sure you have friends. Like I'm having, dinner with a friend later, and something I learned about this friend early on is whether he likes something or not, he complains about it. So that can't be the litmus test about whether or not this person likes things, you know?
Yeah.
Because if they're talking about something, they're complaining about it. So it's like, all right, I know that. So now I've got to look for other indicators that this is actually causing them pain or actual problem they want to have solved. And that's where the human element really comes into it, and it's interesting because I don't know if there's data on this. And honestly, I don't know what the literature says about it, aphantasia, apart from a little bit that I've listened to in podcasts. And I'm still getting educated on this and, ready. Like I want to volunteer for studies if they're available because I'm curious. But this might sound weird, but something that I've struggled with all throughout my life is attaching to people, and which is especially weird because I'm in a role where, like my particular role working with partners is about relationships.
Hmm.
And to a certain degree, when it comes to creating relationships, that's an easy thing for me. And creating deep relationships is easy for me because the connection thing in my brain. I'll look for points of connection with people and can typically take what they're saying and connect it to, relate to other connections that they've made with that. That really gives somebody a sense that they feel seen. Now, if that learning stalls out, what I don't have is I don't have the ability to go back and replay. I don't have
Hmm.
the ability to go back and relive these fond memories with this person that's going to prompt me to send them a note or call them or send them a text or something that says, hey, I was just thinking about you,
Hmm.
and it's not that people don't come to mind. It's just that they're not coming to mind in a way that's triggering the same kind of emotional or, spiritual response that it triggered in the first place when we were there live in person when it happened. So there's not really a whole lot of going back to me. Now, the positive side to this is it means I don't really hold on to grudges. It's easier for me to forgive because I'm not constantly reliving things. The negative side for me is it also means that there are probably, moments I've shared with friends and family that were deeply meaningful that are
Hmm.
there's the abstract concept that happens. There's a connection to that person, and I love that person because of that connection to those things that happened. But there's not a real sense of reliving that. There's
Hmm.
no sense of being able to go back. If I'm apart from somebody and I'm not communicating with them for a long period of time, there's not memories I'm going to replay in my head that involve them, more than likely. And even if there are, those are fleeting enough, they don't really stick with it. So, in the past, it's felt like that's made kind of maintaining those connections a challenge or staying in touch a challenge,
Hmm.
and I think it's even a double-edged sword because, a lot of friends I talk to, if they go have a really great experience doing something, half the fun is getting to relive it later in their head, getting
Hmm.
to think back to the picture, close their eyes and smell the smells, close their eyes and hear the sounds. And in my case, that's not there. It's filed away in that database. It's just something that happened. There's a positive association with it, so I probably want to go do it again. But because I don't spend time reliving, it gives me this drive and hunger to constantly be out creating new experiences like that. So it's a dual-edged sword in the sense that, I'm a doer, very adventurous, but kind of have an eye looking forward and thinking about, all right, if this is what gives me life, then what are the ways I get to continue to do this? Because it's not going to stay the same my whole life. I can't keep doing the same things I've been doing. It's just a fact, the kind of a truth or truism, if you will, about the way that kind of life evolves. Different responsibilities you have, your own physical limitations, that kind of as you get older start to go away, and then as you get even older start to come back. So I think the pursuit of that sort of like satisfaction and that experience, coupled with the fact that I'm not reliving things, it can make it feel like you're leaving things behind or leaving people behind and like you're maybe missing out. So it's interesting, but that's something that I've been thinking about, just quite a bit lately
Hmm.
because it does. Yeah, I mean, that seems sort of, you know, like being somebody who's described as kind of highly relational seems contradictory to the way my brain actually works,
Yeah,
you
that
know?
it is so interesting. I mean, just purely from like a curiosity perspective, I'm so I just all I want to do right now is like you go to after this podcast is like go on Wikipedia and like figure
Yeah.
out exactly what aphantasia is and like how what exactly what are the mechanisms behind it. Like that's
Mhm.
it's just so interesting. But I also just love your even throughout this, and I can't understand what it must be like to not be able to replay memories, super easily because it is something that has always been pretty easy for me. I think even more so than most people. And yeah, to your point, I'm definitely one of those people where like things happen once, great great thing, or a bad thing happened once, and I can like
Yeah.
really like pull myself there in that period of time again and like
Mhm.
re-experience the positive or negative emotions, right? It was interesting just hearing you speak about it in a positive lens too, that yeah, like you don't necessarily have grudges or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, like what happens when you take a photo or someone takes a photo of you enjoying a moment, and then when you look at that photo, does that trigger like a recognition? It's like, oh, okay, I remember that. Or is it more like who this is like such a foreign concept to me, is that really me in the photo sort of thing? Like how does it work?
It's not that is it me in the photo because I've got concrete memories about that event happening. I mean, let's hope so anyway. Um, so like it's interesting because I think that because I grew up in an era where not everybody had a camera and the cameras weren't attached to phones yet. That's part of why my brain developed the way it did. Because nowadays, when I look back at photos or videos, especially,
Hmm.
that can take me back there, and that can give me that sense of I think what other people
That's
don't need
awesome.
that media to get.
Yeah.
So the funny thing about that though is like you'd think that knowing that I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna go take a bunch of photos then and video everything. I don't, and it's something that isn't necessarily in my nature to go and try to document that to relive it later. And I think that's because I had just sort of developed this natural rhythm of life that was about seeking new and
Mm.
less about sort of reliving and going back and kind of reimagining old, you know?
One of the things that you said to me during one of our one-on-one calls has really changed the way I live my day, which is it was something along the lines of, yeah, if you get your time passes more quickly if you have a monotonous routine that you stick to. And the more you can vary that routine up and shake it up and have those novel experiences, the slower time passes. And I
Yeah.
just love that. And I've been trying to just do something new every day, whether that's, take my dog on a different route
Hmm.
on his morning walks, or like,
Yeah.
just do something completely new that I haven't done before. And I have noticed, Mike, like time does seem to be like passing by more slowly. And I feel like I'm living life and being more in the present moment that much more. And it's really, really interesting.
It's crazy the way that happens. I mean, because if you think like, if you think about a night that you went and grabbed dinner with friends or had a game night,
Mhm.
completely sober, no drinks, no drugs, you drive home, you don't remember driving home.
Right.
If it's from a place where you've driven home from before, you don't remember that drive. So
Yep.
many times, or like what's nerve-wracking for me is, I lock the door every time I leave the house. Okay, great. I don't remember doing it because I do it every time I leave the house,
Hmm.
So like that lack of a memory, I think, is stems from the fact that it's become automated and it's an automated process. And the less algorithmic your life is, the less predictable it is, the slower time feels. It genuinely does slow things down. So, people will say you blink and 20 years passed. And it's funny because I remember I had this realization about 3 years ago. I was living in Austin and, I have been, and I had been, and I realized that I served in the Marines for 4 years. I realized that I'd been out for 4 times longer than I'd been in. And I'd been living in Austin for 16 years, but it didn't feel like it had passed in the blink of an eye. It didn't feel like I just woke up one day and it's, oh man, I've been doing the same thing for the last 16 years. What have I been doing with my life? Quite the opposite. I was surprised that I'd been in one place for that long because I'd had so many varied experiences that just made it feel like I was in a different place. It didn't feel like I was in the same place. Part of that's where I choose to live. It changes substantially enough every year. You've got to relearn it. If you leave this town and come back to it, that's just the way it is. And that's because it's growing a lot right now. Some people don't like that. A lot of folks, I think they find comfort in routines, and I do too. The difference is I think what really gets me going is being able to take the comfort I have in a particular routine and try it out somewhere new,
Hmm.
try it out in a different way. I mean, I think something that's been essential for my own, like, productivity, my own mental health, and just my own ability to frankly continue to live here in Austin because I want to is, I've started leaving in the summer for about 4 or 5 months, hopping in a van and going and living in that van up in the mountains because that is a bit of a different adventure every day. And then when I get back to the town, I get to reconnect with people. I've been gone long enough for them to forget me or for me to forget them. I get to reconnect with the family, which is one of the main things that keeps me here is just my extended family is still in this area.
Hmm.
And having, the ability to be a bit more of a digital nomad, it really provides a sense of novelty. It provides a sense of, difference that makes everything feel like it is not just like racing by me. And I'm very grateful to be in a position where I understand that, I think the convention that most of our parents were brought up in is you work really, really hard, you do the same thing over and over again every day, and you save up, and then you retire, and then you get to have fun and do what you want. And the problem with that conceptually is you're spending your life rehearsing for something that you're not going to do, or you think about it vice versa. You're rehearsing to just do the same thing over and over again, to not prioritize getting out and having new experiences because you're deferring those for a future date when you might or might not be able to do it. And you're banking on the fact that you're going to enjoy something that you haven't spent any time rehearsing,
Hmm.
you know? I had a friend put this in a very pointed way the other day. And basically, he said, he's like, yeah, I think I'm gonna retire in like 10, 15 years. So I'm taking up golf now. And I was like, really? He's like, oh yeah, I've been competitive my whole life. There's no way I'm gonna be happy in retirement if I don't have some area to compete. And I don't want to just get to retirement and suck at golf and not be able to compete with my friends. So I need to get good at this now.
Yeah. Oh man, that's making me want to take up golf too.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's like
That's
good
so, I mean,
forethought.
yeah, there's so many things that you touched on there that I'd love to, I guess, hone in on. The first is what you mentioned about, yeah, like taking that time, that summer off to, rent an RV and live the digital nomad life for a summer. And I remember that time, and you and we still interfaced pretty regularly, and I always felt like those were some of and granted, we haven't had as much of a regular interaction as frequently as we did when you were doing that. Like
Mm,
those were some of the most like eye-opening calls, at least for me, in terms of like work, creativity, and innovation. I wonder how much of that was because you had like access to just nature, and you were
mhm,
living, you were able to clear your mind, you were able to be, I'm assuming you were
mhm.
happier, and there's a lot of research that says, hey, if employees are happy, they are more creative. If employees are
Yeah.
happy, they're more productive. And like,
Mhm,
I wonder, particularly for neurodivergent individuals in general, it's, I think, the way that normal life is structured is it almost makes it more difficult for people like us to have that same sort of level of happiness. So we kind of, especially
mhm.
for folks with ADHD, and it sounds like aphantasia as well, that sort of novelty seeking behavior is like, it's so critical to having that happiness. And yeah, I guess like I'd love to. The other, actually, the other thing I wanted to talk about real quick was this idea of like niche construction, Mike. So there's this great book called The Power of Neurodiversity, and I think we had talked about it
Mhm.
previously, and it talks about how, yeah, there's two kind of primary competing forces that have driven majority of not just human but any evolution. The first,
Yeah.
obviously, we know is Darwinism, right? Strongest survive sort of thing. But the
Mhm.
other one is really interesting. It's called niche construction. Again, most evolutionary biologists, anthropologists these days are citing niche construction as important as Darwinism is to evolution. And niche construction is basically, rather than you adapting to your environment, you change your environment to adapt to you.
Mm.
And this sort of concept of really flipping the script, I think, if more neurodivergent individuals had the courage to do this, or maybe work things out with their boss,
Yeah.
leverage accommodations to do these, to kind of construct this own niche so that they can be happier, they can thrive. I think the better that
Mhm.
even the organization would be, because they'd have more productive, happier.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the first step in that is permission.
Hmm.
It's funny. I was talking to a friend earlier this year about just this horrible experience she was having with a coworker and how negative the coworker was. And, she was kind of going through it. And I just remember saying, I was like, it sounds like your coworker is just looking for permission to leave. And I don't think anybody's told her that she's allowed to, that she has permission to quit if she wants to, and I think that, if you think about the way that sort of all like most all of us were brought up, to varying degrees were brought up in sort of a neurotypical system, and we're brought up to, believe that we can trust people who like the right thing, who like the right things and don't like the wrong things, and that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And I think that the fact of the matter is what podcasts like this and other work you're doing are really bringing to the world is a sense of helping folks understand, hey, there's a lot more folks out there who are not neurotypical than you think. They probably work with you, they might work for you. And if you're struggling to help those people achieve what they want to achieve and feel like they're contributing true value in the team or in their own individual work, it's probably because they're not happy. Now, there's limitations that people will put on themselves. I got a good friend, and I tell him all the time that he needs to stop putting his own happiness out of his reach. He needs to stop putting blockers in front of his ability to do that. Because a
Mm.
lot of us do that. Because a lot of us are trained to believe that, again, either deferred happiness or we don't deserve it, one of the two. But the fact is the people that I'm around, that I engage with, they deserve my best. I'm going to give them my best when I can get out of an office and get into the woods 5, 6 days a week. And so it doesn't matter if I'm back home or if I'm out in the van. I'm in the woods. I'm finding a way to be out there, and I'm finding a way to continue to have novel experience even amidst routine.
Mm.
And I think that like that's what's beautiful about nature and just about getting out in the woods in particular, or whatever natural environment you're getting in. If you hike the same trail twice in one year, it's not the same trail because we didn't pave it, right? We didn't go out and we didn't modify that environment. That environment's up to nature. Nature's modifying that. So you've got to get out and work with nature to understand how to best, navigate that particular trail that you're hiking, or in my case, I like to mountain bike and do it, almost obsessively. But part of the fun with that is my bike's, in a slightly different place every day. My body's in a different place every day. And the trails, again, more people who ride them, the less consistent they're going to be, because the more they're going to change, they're going to develop and evolve. And so having that balance, it makes it easier for me to love going into the office and connecting with people. It makes it easier for me to show up and try to give my best more consistently than I might otherwise. And so I think being able to provide that niche construction, what it really comes down to is asking some hard questions, which is, what do I need? What do I want? What am I doing that's keeping me from getting what I need and what I want? Are there other people in my life who can support me in this?
Mm.
And are there other people who are not going to support me? And then how do I set expectations for myself within those relationships so that I can understand what I can expect is coming from those people? And, you know, if I need support, I limit my exposure to the people who aren't going to be supportive. But if I need pushback, because I do, I'm going to go out and I'm going to, ask for somebody to tell me, no, that's dumb. You can't do that. And here's why, because I love you and I know, like, so, I think that it's essential to understand what you need and to be able to find ways to meet those needs. What sucks is they always involve people, but that's also what's great about it. So, like, I think that it makes it challenging, but at the same time, the reward from that is you go through a little bit of discomfort. You go through a discovery phase. You figure out what works and what doesn't. And frankly, you have to figure out what doesn't work for it to work. But the beauty in that is, if you have the right attitude about it, it's just one more form of novelty that's going to make time slow down for you. That's going to give you an experience that you can point to, that you can laugh at later. I mean, that if you're not like me, you can relive. So,
I love that. There's so much wisdom in there. There's some great stuff in that, Mike. I really appreciate that. We do this thing in this podcast, right, where the previous guest asks the current guest a question, and
mhm,
Jason West asked a question around your childhood. So, how did
mhm,
your childhood affect the way that you view your neurodivergence? And I'm really curious, particularly from a like a learning, education environment, how
mhm,
we know that the school system isn't set up for neurodivergent individuals, certainly not folks with aphantasia. And
mhm.
I was just wondering, yeah, if we could also take that and expand it to, yeah, your learning environment. How did you
Yeah,
learn and how did you kind of overcome some of that?
it took a long time. You know, I'm lucky because I think most people would describe me as smart. The kind of smart I am is the connections I was talking about. I'm able to just make a lot of connections and keep those connections in active recall. right? So, when we can be talking about things, and I happen to know a bit about a bit. I was a C student all through high school. I failed classes. When I was in elementary school, my teachers wanted to hold me back because they thought that I couldn't read and that I had a reading disability. And what's awesome is they were onto something, and I appreciate that. But the reason they thought I couldn't read is because they were asking me to draw pictures of the words I just read.
Mm.
They
Mm-hmm.
weren't asking me to replicate what I just read.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as my brain got to a point that I could read the words on a page out loud to myself, I could then recite that back to them. Because again, I'm just storing that as a, blob of information sitting in the brain. So it impacted me because I didn't feel like a great student. I didn't feel all that smart. I felt way different. And it felt like school was never a game I was going to win. And even at that age, I had kind of a competitive sense. And because school wasn't a game I was going to win, yeah, what do you do with it? And the combination of learning systems just not being set up for somebody who has no sensory imagination. I think back to different things we would do in language arts classes or even in science classes where they want you to draw pictures, they want you to describe, but they want you to go from seeing the object and taking it away and then do all of that. And that was kind of torturous, you know? So it's interesting because I think the way that it impacted my career, frankly, was it made me really nervous about putting all my eggs in the basket of my intellect and pursuing a career where I could really bank on my brain.
Mm-hmm.
So what that led to though was actually a pretty cool journey of self-discovery. I knew that I'm for the listener, I'm 6'1". I'm about 200 pounds and I've been about that size since I was 19. So I joined the Marines right out of high school because that just seemed like a logical choice. It's like professional athletics for poor kids. So it was like, all right, let's go do that for a while. And upon joining and getting in, I realized that I definitely wasn't the fastest. I definitely wasn't the strongest. I was a really good shot. I wasn't the best, but I remember anything academics we did, I just excelled in. And it's because all that we were supposed to do was memorize things. I was really good at that. And so that was a little insight into, okay, I can learn things quicker and make more connections than a lot of the other folks that I'm working with, especially when I'm left to do it on my own, you know? So the other thing that I realized was I struggled enough in high school that I got into an alternative program and graduated. I was able to graduate early. But the reason I was able to graduate early is because that alternative program was the first program I'd been in that was self-paced. And I did my second semester senior year in 10 days because I could operate at my pace and I wasn't bored and I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't slowed down. So I learned that if I had to do things quickly and that if I wasn't limited by the methods I could use to learn, that I could do that pretty well. And it was funny because I took those tools, I went to, college and had a really high GPA after having been a solid, C to D student all through high school. And so being able to take that, it gave me confidence that, okay, maybe I'm good at this kind of school, but I still didn't quite have the confidence to just jump into a career path where I was really looking to lean on my brain. And so weirdly, I was very attracted to music. I graduated into a recession, and I just figured it out. And fortunately, at that point in time, Austin was a cheap enough place to live that you could scrape by making a living playing music, and started off kind of being service industry teacher level sort of wages, and that was enough to be comfortable here in town. And you know, that was fortunate for me because it gave me a profession and a career where I could really like set myself apart with how quickly I could learn things, how well I could reproduce them, and that the biggest thing it did though was it framed it in the lens of a community because I was relying on other people to keep me working when I was doing music full time. I was relying on people to call me, to hire me to go on tour with their bands, and getting an understanding that okay, there's a bunch of other people out here who are enough like me that we relate. We're all trying to do the same thing together, and we're doing this. That was great. I don't know if anybody, like listening picked up on this, but like I was a professional musician for 10 years and I can't hear things in my head. It has to come out to hear.
Yeah.
Like, so there's no sensory imagination there. But that's part of, I think, what drove me to do music is I'm not hearing music in my head when I'm not playing it. So I want to be playing it constantly because I love it. I was just attracted to that, and so like all through childhood, I felt different. I felt like I didn't quite belong. There wasn't a system set up that I could really win in. And that's all I wanted to do with life. Life experience brought me to a place where when I was ready to go ahead and place the bet and think, okay, I think I can do something with my brain. I had the experience at that point to know that if I was going to do that, I needed that niche construction. I needed to be able to build an environment around myself that gave me this sense of active and passive recovery that would make me very, able to contribute. I knew I needed something that was fast paced, or at least that I could set the pace. And I knew I needed something where the people around me were the ones who were motivating me to show up and give my best.
Mm-hmm.
Because like those three elements became just the absolute most important and were just the keys to my own success, being able to jump in and uh, do things enough my way that I could get on the program and really help, drive value and help people solve big problems. And that's what it feels like I get to do, here. And like when I first joined the company, I jumped around to other companies a little bit, and I just hadn't found an environment where I just felt supported to just go at my own speed. And, you know, getting somewhere where I felt supported to go at my own speed, I felt supported in the kind of like rest and recovery that just really is meaningful to me and helps me produce. Like it's something that I've wanted to hold on to. And I want to make sure that I take with me, regardless of what I do. I mean, if there's young people listening right now, I've probably been through 4 different career transitions in my life. I think kids these days are going to have to go through 5 or 6 because the world is just changing. Like, you know, I technically I'm doing a job that wasn't a job when I was in high school. Said we both are,
Mm-hmm.
you know, except for like some small niche areas of industry or the military. Like this was not an industry. This was not profession, So it's like it's crazy to think when you're a kid that you're going to be doing a job that doesn't exist in an industry that doesn't exist. And you're going to be doing it in a way that is inconceivable to, and by that I just mean like being able to travel around in a van and still, be in meetings 6, 7, 8 hours a day, producing good work, and then going out and, playing with the bears and the moose in the forest. So
You know, I loved, I guess, three things that stood out to me there. And number one, yeah, like you mentioned, the themes of niche construction were just so like prominent in that story, like from joining the Marine Corps and leveraging kind of like your athletic strengths to excel in that setting, and then finding a community of musicians to like express yourself creatively and have like them hold you accountable as well. So you have like that creative outlet, that sort of
yeah.
quite literal, like novel music that you're producing every all the time. And you also, I remember we've chatted in the past, you also got to play with some cool music technology too. Yeah, you kind of scratch the novelty itch there, which is like, it's so interesting that the life that you have led, and probably part of the reason why you're so good at your role is like you have found, you're like a black belt at niche construction. Like you genuinely just you change the environment to adapt to you. And I think that's such an important theme for our listeners to recognize. A few questions for me,
Yeah.
Mike, as we approach the tail end here. The first is, yeah, what advice would you give to other folks with perhaps they have aphantasia or something similar, who are interested in careers like sales engineering
Mhm.
or product focused roles where you are speaking to customers and you're identifying their problems? What advice would you give them?
Do your best to develop a level of self-awareness that you can unashamedly self-select in and out of the right places to work, not even the right roles.
Hmm.
Because my success is dependent on the people I work with. Because the people I work with give me the leeway to be me. And that's what is helping me contribute in the way that I contribute. It's essential that you have that level of self-awareness and understanding. And so, I mean, I'm sure you've been through like, a lot of leadership trainings just like I have. That's the main thing they're teaching you is self-awareness and awareness of kind of the differences around how others process things. I think that that's a really big important piece. While you're developing that self-awareness, if you're, an AFAT, make sure that you try things at different speeds. see how that feels in terms of how fast you can work, how much you can work, get a realistic sense of that. And then the other thing is, just make sure that something that I've been doing lately is just instead of setting goals, I set standards. Like I need to be able to do 20 push-ups every day. If I can't, I'm below my standard. I need a remediation plan, right? So instead of, I want to be at this place or I want to do this thing, I'm less concerned about who signs my checks and more concerned about working with people. They're going to keep me accountable and keep me motivated. And that's a standard that I've set for myself. So I am going to assume that I'm not going to work here for the rest of my life, but wherever the next place is, that next place is going to be selected based off of the fact that I trust that I can work with the people that I need to work with because they respect me enough to hold me accountable, to deliver value, but give me the space I need to recover. And then the other thing is, and I don't know if this is a fan or if this is just me, figure out what rest looks like for you and prioritize that. Because for a lot of people, rest looks like sitting on the couch, curling up with a good book, maybe watching TV, sitting around and, talking to friends. Those things are all things that I participate in, but not quite as much as other ways that I actually go achieve rest, you know? So just having that level of self-awareness and understanding the rest that's required for you to both perform in a way that meets the standards you're being held accountable to by people, but also the rest that's required for you to be able to go and recover in a way that helps you meet those standards. And when I think of recovery, I think of active recovery because it's my favorite. So, you know, if I just went home and, zoned out, had some cannabis or had a drink, and then just sat on the couch and watched TV and went to bed every night, I wouldn't be in a good mood. I wouldn't be as productive. I'd be struggling to get through the day. I wouldn't have the motivation that I need to get things done, and I couldn't deliver to the people who are holding me accountable. So I need to make sure that my rest routine and rituals, that whatever protocols are involved in that, set me up for success, both in my professional life, but also in the hobbies and other areas that I invest my time that feed into that professional life. So I think that's like what's really been a key to my success. And I think that it's something that especially I think it's helpful for anybody who's neurodivergent, frankly, but especially for the A fans out there. Like, ours is a weird one. It's one of those things where at first like, well, I just can't see pictures. It's not that big of a deal. But just even telling my own story, it's a big deal. It kept me from thinking that one of my greatest strengths is a strength for most of my life.
Mhm. There's so much power there, and to your point, doing those three things, like number one, just having that self-awareness. I think Aristotle said, "Know thyself," right? Like that's like literally everything. Just know thyself, know
Yep.
yourself. And the second thing about surrounding yourself with people that can help you set the bar high, right?
Hmm.
Like they say, right? Like you're the sum of the five people you spend the most time with. So make sure that those five people, or really anyone, encourage you to bring out the best self, whatever that
Absolutely.
is to you for you. And then the last one, which is like really ensuring that even during the rest that we all need, that you are, setting yourself up for success. It truly is like a rest, right? I think, and I fall victim to this as well. I'm scrolling through like Instagram or Reels or whatever, right? All I do is find myself just before I know it, 20 minutes have passed and I'm
Yeah.
actually way more anxious than I was 20 minutes ago when I sat down and started scrolling. So, yeah, I think that those are such great points.
Yeah. Scrolling can be a good brain break too. Something that I've tried, like when I've had the anxiety around the scrolling thing, like if I'm knee deep in a deadline,
Yeah.
I know it helps my brain to check out like that for periods of time. So I'll just set a timer. All right, you get 10 minutes to scroll. Go. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. 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 No,
Because it's like I think it's important to just to give yourself permission to just zone out
yeah.
too. 'Cause again, that's just part of the whole recovery thing. But if it's adding to anxiety, like you're saying, that's not helping you rest. That's not any part of your recovery. So like it's so important to know yourself and just to be able to come back to that and always come back to, if I know my needs, then I'm confident that I'm around the people who are going to help me meet my needs,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's probably if there's a secret to life, I think that is the secret to life. And that's what gives me the greatest sense of fulfillment is living with, hanging with, and working with people who I am confident have my best interest at heart and who aren't going to ostracize, penalize, or anything like that, just for me being able to meet my needs. Like it's important, and I think the more awareness that folks out there like you can raise about this, and the more that we can do this kind of stuff together, I think the more the message is going to get out, and the better the quality of life and the quality of work for neurodivergent people can be.
Yeah, I totally agree. Mike, it's been honestly a pleasure. Thank you so much. I've learned so much from this, as I always do when I chat with you. What is one question you'd like to leave for the next guest, Mike?
So the question that I would have is, so when you discovered kind of the source of your neurodivergence, when you told your family or the people closest to you, what was their response? Were they surprised or not? And then more detail.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a really good one. Awesome. Mike, thank you once again so much for your time, man, and hope that our listeners enjoyed. You got a glimpse into aphantasia, which I think is probably the coolest. I mean, I'm sure it can't be easy to have. I think it's just so interesting. And also you got a glimpse of really a brilliant SE with awesome product sense and clearly who's lived a very rich, meaningful life. So hope that everyone got as much out of this as I did. Cheers.
Thanks so much.